That's the loudest I think I've ever had to talk in this room. Well, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. This is one of our biggest crowds we've had. So thank you all. So thank you all for coming to this edition of our guest speaker series. This is a program we started about 5 years ago, where at least once a month we have guest speakers come in from all over the United States in some cases, but mostly local speakers. So we're very happy. Tonight we have a couple podcasters from Canandaigua, Andrew and Caleb Cotter, who will be telling the life and story of Ely Parker. If you haven't heard their podcast, be sure to check it out. It's very, very interesting. It's Iroquois History and Legend podcast. I had to rehearse that. For some reason I wanted to get it backwards, so my dyslexia must be kicking in that I didn't know I had. So, one quick note before we get started, I just want to thank GoArt, who provided us with a grant this year through the DEC program that helps make this possible. So thank you to them. And I wish everybody to enjoy. There is coffee and cookies and water. If you can make it through, everybody to the back, it's back there. And thank you all. So enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us out. Like I said, I'm Caleb, and this is my older brother, Andrew. And when we first got the invitation to come up, we thought, 10, 15 people will probably be there. They probably won't know anything, just we can, and then we find out it's full of historians and historians from the reservation, and we're like, okay, we better make sure we're on our game tonight because we're going to get called out for everything we say. Why don't we tell you a little bit about our podcast? Earlier, one person in the crowd asked me, why are you doing this? It's a great question. So let us tell you about our show and how we decided to start it.
Yeah, I guess we'll start at the beginning. We're from Canandaigua, New York, and Canandaigua is built on the ancient, it's not really ancient, it's relatively recent history.
1100 AD.
Well, yes, that's true. Anyway, we're from Canandaigua, New York, traditionally on Seneca native land. Growing up, every year there was the treaty commemoration. The Treaty of Canandaigua was signed there back in the mid-1790s. And our dad would drag us to these things. And boy, we didn't know what was going on. But our dad always made it a point to go there. And he said that we need to make sure that we're being a part of these treaty celebrations and remember them and remember what the treaties are in them and honor them, because even still today there are issues that still come up between people of the community in New York and the members of the Six Nations, and so that was always ingrained in us from a young age. And we kind of stuck that in the back burner. As Caleb and I got older, we were really into history. We started listening to history podcasts, and then eventually we thought, why don't we do a podcast? And then the question was, what do we do a podcast on that would be interesting that no one's done before?
Does anyone here not know what a podcast is?
And it's okay if you don't.
I know it is, but I've never used it.
Well, that's fine. To simplify what a podcast is, it's literally radio, but it's on-demand radio. So instead of turning on Wham or any radio channel when you're in your car, it's pre-recorded and you can tune to a private channel and you can listen to the content that somebody's making. So that's what a podcast is. It's literally just like a radio program that we put all up on our own private channel.
That's personalized. Okay.
Yeah. So, like you said, we were thinking, what are we going to do? It has to be something that you're passionate about. We already had our interest in local history. And then we thought, well, we also want something nobody's done, at least in podcast format. Obviously there's hundreds and hundreds of people dedicating time to the study of local history and Native American history, but at the time, and even now, there's really nothing in the podcast sphere. So we thought we could kind of be pioneers in this. But wait a minute, is that something we want to tackle? Especially being a couple Irish boys from Canandaigua, So we did our research. We spent about 4 years before we even started the podcast reading every single book,
visiting Canandaigua for every single event.
Speaking with local historians and so forth. And after 4 years, we felt like, I don't know, let's try this. So we decided to take a whack at it, and we are now about 80 episodes in.
Wow.
I believe over 50 hours. And it still feels like that we're just the tiniest bit. And you know, the name Iroquois History and Legends, what we are, we were interested in American history, and we found that when we went back, everything just kept pointing back to the Native Americans that were here.
Specifically the Six Nations.
So, yes, in all the founding of our country, throughout all the wars, throughout all the peacetime, throughout all the hardship, there was always involvement. And we thought this is something that in school, you know, you might learn, oh, the Indians lived here and they grew corn on the hill, or, you know, Sullivan marched through here and burned the orchards. And, you know, that's basically it. At least,
Thanksgiving.
Yeah, Thanksgiving, that's right. They all cooked deep fried turkeys and got together and sang Kumbaya around the campfire, right? So we thought there's opportunity here to tell American history, because when we started the show, we came up with a slogan, and that was, their history is our history. We're not Native Americans, but their history and their involvement in our country, the country that we all share, there's a section that's not being told. So we thought we'd take a whack at telling it.
And obviously tonight we are not going to tell you the entire history of the Six Nations, because if we can't tell it in 500 hours of content, and we're only up to post-Civil War period, and as you know, Six Nations history did not end at the Treaty of Canandaigua. Like, I can't tell you how many people post online, they're like, oh, when the Six Nations lived in New York, it's like, they're still here, they're still nations, they never surrendered, we have a treaty with them ratified by Congress. There's just a lot of ignorance, and usually when I run into people, that's usually what they say is, we're still here, and stop pretending like we're not. But I don't want to speak for everybody else. So this evening we've been asked to talk about the incredible life of Mr. Ely Parker, and so we're going to go forward with doing that. Does that sound like fun? Yes. All right. So first off, this handsome gentleman, Ely Parker, was a Seneca Sachem. Some people call him a chief, but if you know anything about the Six Nations, they don't have chiefs because it is a matrilineal society. The women get together, the clan mothers, and they appoint who's going to be a sachem. And a sachem would be a representative or a senator, if we were to put that into our American mindset. It's not an exact equivalent, but they're people that go on the councils to represent their communities, their nations, their clans. And so eventually he becomes a Seneca Sachem, but he also becomes a United States Union General in the Civil War. So it seems like those two things would really don't go together, right? So how did he get there? And that's what we're going to continue to do. So Ely was born just down the road here at Indian Falls, just outside of Batavia. At the time, on the Tonawanda community land. Now the borders have moved, and where he was born is no longer on the area. But his father was a miller and a minister, and his mother was a Wolf clan mother. She actually had the title Mother of Nations, which goes all the way back to the story of the pacemaker and Jacques and we don't have time to get into all that. And then he was a relative, either a grandnephew of the famed orator Red Jacket.
The world that he lived in the time, this is a couple generations after the treaties in the 1790s and the Revolutionary War. So Ely grew up in a shrinking demographic as far as territory, and he would have grown up with his grandfather telling him, you know, we used to have all this land. We used to, you know, our territory stretched all the way across New York, and now they're on these small reservations. So there's still people alive when he's young that remember the Revolutionary War. And this time in the early to mid 1800s, this is when we're starting to see a lot of the push of the Native Americans. And we got a map here of a modern map right here where his home is. And then this is a map in 1804, shortly after the land sales went through. And so this shows the size of what the Tonawanda Reservation was then. It's much smaller than it is today. But as you can see, Batavia, I was told there's a laser on here. No. Batavia is right there. As you can see, the reservation actually stopped right above it. Much different from today.
So
there's a couple key things that happened to Ely in his young life that kind of push him to where to the great man that we know him now as the general. You know, a lot of things, the butterfly effect, right? Little things in your life that you don't even appreciate at the time, and then maybe when you're an adult, you look back and you think things could have changed if just one little thing happened. But there's something that happened to Ely early in his life, and that was he gets made fun of for talking funny. And we hear about bullying in school. I probably made fun of people when they talk funny, but some soldiers came into their village and he tried speaking to them in English. And they started laughing at his accent or his mispronunciation of the words. So from a very young age, Ely makes a mental note to himself and a conviction to himself, I'm going to learn English so well that nobody will be able to even tell that I'm a Native American by my voice. So he started practicing every day, practicing his words. And what are the Iroquois, the Seneca, what are the Sachems known for? Their oratory skills. They already were practicing in their own language, so he's going to apply what their cultures are already known for and transfer it over into English.
So from a young age, he was a gifted learner. Having studied several foreign languages, I can appreciate how hard it is to try and not only take on another language, but try and speak it without an accent. That takes a lot of, I have a degree in linguistics, and just getting your tongue to move in the right positions. Even though the sound might sound the same, just having it a little bit off is what gives people that accent. And for him to work that hard to try and speak English was just amazing. And so even as a teenager, he becomes so apt at English that people in his own community start using him as a translator. Because the issue is, during this time, there was a certain land company based out of Batavia that was trying to seize the reservation through fraud. I've never been there before, but what had happened was people from the Ogden Land Company, the Holland Land Company that intertwined, but your director can share more on that. Basically what they did is they started going to these chiefs, men that were Seneca leaders, and they were bribing them with gifts of money or alcohol or something else, or maybe just tricking them into signing a piece of paper where they would sell their entire reservation for the Tonawanda community. The issue was, in their constitution, it's not like where we have to have a majority vote to approve something. There, it's unanimous consensus, right? To make any decision, you need to have everybody together, and the clan mothers need to sign off on this. But all they did is get a few men to sign off on it, and they thought, oh, we got a majority, and so it's good, and let's send this treaty off to Congress and get it voted on and get it set, and then we can seize the land. Meanwhile, the people back in the community are like, hey, we never signed off on this. Just because a few rogue guys did does not mean we're selling all our land. And so you had the leaders of the community trying to figure out, how do we save our reservation? We don't even know what it is they signed. We don't even know what the treaties of Canandaigua are written out. We know what our verbal agreement was with them, but they can't read and write English. And so they head to Albany to start checking the archives and trying to get through legal loopholes to save their land. And so they bring Ely along to be the translator and reader.
As a young teenager, most likely only 12, 13 years old at this point.
Yeah. So while they're working on this, and while they're in Albany, Ely meets a certain man who just happens to be researching stuff about the Six Nations.
Yeah. Lewis Henry Morgan, known to some as the father of anthropology. He was really the first person that wanted to take a culture and document it in scientific form.
Every aspect, from diet and agriculture to history to government system to family life to religious beliefs and practices to names, every encompassing area.
So Morgan was a man out of Rochester, and he just so happened to be in Albany while this is going on, and he's actually there for a very similar reason that Ely and the Seneca are there.
he's looking up old treaties for his own personal research for a book he's working on. When all of a sudden he meets this young teenage Seneca boy who can speak perfect English and is there with all the sachems and the clan mothers translating for them. And he says, there's something special about this kid. So he goes over, he introduces himself, and a friendship is made very quickly. So Morgan offers Ely's family the opportunity to have them send 3 of their children to school to get an English education. And it wasn't, the people didn't sign off at all, oh yeah, English is so awesome. They realized that we want these kids to learn English so that they can grow up to understand the laws here to help the people. So it wasn't, it's not in our American mindset, I want my kid to succeed. It's you go to succeed to help your entire community and your entire family. So Ely and his sister, and was it his younger brother too, all went to an English-speaking school. Well, it'd be like a boarding school where other students went there to learn to do things. He excelled at that, and eventually he was given a position to apply at Rensselaer Polytechnic College, where he studied engineering, math, and all kinds of different subjects. He gets done with school, and he's so intelligent that he's going to pass the bar exam to become a lawyer. And so this is really what it's all been about, like him becoming a lawyer. That'd be so awesome. Someone from the community that he's from is a lawyer now that can like file lawsuits to save their land, or if we have issues with things. Wouldn't that be great, Caleb?
Picture yourself being a politician in New York State and seeing this young man about to take the bar exam. And you're thinking, wait a minute, we can kind of push everything through right now without it getting any public attention. If we have real lawsuits coming against the state from a lawyers, they were terrified. So they needed to find a way to stop him from taking the bar exam and passing it. And that's, well, they came up with this excuse. Well, you're not an American, not a Native American, not a native born, well.
Not a U.S. citizen.
You're a Native American, but you're not a native born American citizen. And so only U.S. citizens can take the bar exam. So Ely has just spent, I believe it was a 3-year apprenticeship he spent working in the law office to get ready to take this exam, only to be told, no, you can't. So this has been his entire, late teens, basically from when he met Morgan until 19 years old. So he spent 6 years on this education, and all of a sudden it's all come crashing down. His expectations, and also what the people in his community were hoping for too. Where they're, oh, it's not gonna happen.
Yep.
What am I gonna do now?
So he decides to put his engineering knowledge, at least what he learned in school, to work. And he starts working on upgrading the Erie Canal. It had already been dug a few decades before, but they needed to widen it. They needed to put new locks in. They needed to do all kinds of upgrades. And so Ely thought, yeah, I can get a job there. And his job was digging.
Can you imagine graduating from Polytechnic Institute with a degree in engineering, and I believe his first job was Pickman, was the title. But smarter heads prevailed, because pretty soon people realized, wait a minute, this guy
Is educated?
This guy's pretty educated. So within the first year, he was promoted 4 times. And within 2 years, he was given the position of second assistant engineer on the Erie Canal.
All right. Wow.
And much like a lot of positions in business, you have the vice president. Who's in charge, the president or the vice president? Vice president. The executive vice president is really the one. So even though he's at this point second engineer, he's one of the top people from the Rochester to Buffalo area as far as the engineering, upgrading the locks on the Erie Canal.
Here's an old-timey photo of what the old locks, forget what those giant locks you see there, but can you imagine digging through that by hand? No thanks. Anyway, while he's still working as an engineer, his benefactor Morgan starts getting wealthy and influential people in the community together, advocating for the Tonawanda Reservation to remain. I mean, this is serious. This is the Trail of Tears time. This is the Indian Removal Act. This is stuff is going on. They'll be shipped to Oklahoma or who knows where if they've got nowhere else to go. And so Morgan is raising holy hell, writing petitions. He sets up a lobbying firm where people start saying, no, they need to keep their land. They said that it was a total farce. And even President Van Buren, when he got the treaty, he submitted it to Congress, but he said, hey guys, before you vote on this, it's most likely a forgery. But Congress voted on it anyway. So they continue working and working to try and get the lands saved. And eventually, a bargain is struck where the Tonawanda community can buy back their land. How nice of them.
And when they were given the money for their land, it was something like $1.26 an acre. That's the no. I might be off a few cents. Anybody who's got the book, so you can correct me later on that. But the amount they're given, that the opportunity they have to buy them back, it's 20 times higher than what they were paid. And this is all within a couple years of them receiving the money.
So a lot of them raised the money themselves, and then other people from the outside communities donated money to help them purchase it. They were not able to buy everything back, but they were able to buy back enough that at least they could keep their community.
They ended up losing about 1/3 of the reservation, and the clan mothers and Ely counted this as the greatest accomplishment of his life. This is somebody that goes on to be a general in the Civil War, and he's got some other negative aspects too, but he considered saving the reservation as his greatest accomplishment, and this was after losing 1/3 of it. So they were just happy to get what they did, and he was celebrated by all the clan mothers and the leaders of the Seneca.
So the women of the nation decided that this young man has shown enough gumption that we would like to elevate him to the level of a sachem. This is a Cayuga leader. He's a sachem from the Cayuga Nation. And so just give you...
That's
Sam? Thank you. Sam George. I'm sorry, I didn't put the name on it. I was rushed. But these ladies here can explain it better, but this is a headdress that signifies his office with the deer antlers there, and then the feathers in a certain position identify which nation he's from. So, in 1852, they appoint him a sachem. Now, the Seneca have eight, is that correct? Traditionally? They're eight? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, Parker and Morgan continue. They save the reservation. He's made a sachem. And then in 1857, he moves to Galena, Illinois. He's given a government position. He's done such a good job on the canal, but now the canal's been remodeled. And so he's sent out to Illinois to work on some government buildings.
Particularly trading office, hospital, and we got a picture of it, right?
Yes, but it's coming up.
Okay. There it is. This still stands today. I believe it's the only standing Ely Parker engineering that still survives today. And this is an exact quote from the building of the time. This building is so substantial, it'll last for 1,000 years. I got 200 down, right? So 800 more to go. We'll see if it was a figure of speech or not. But you can just see the craftsmanship and this, the beautiful colonial American style. And there's a funny story with this building, and that's, has anybody ever been out there to Illinois? There's not too many limestone quarries out there. So when he gets there, he's told to build this building. He wants to build it with the finest materials, and everything is kind of made out of red brick and just crumbling brick and wood. And so he wants some substantial building materials for this building that he's being commissioned to make. And he's walking by and he notices a pile of a burned down Mormon temple.
Yeah.
He goes over and he's like, this is really good stuff. How the Mormon temple got burned and destroyed, I can't think.
Another story.
I don't think it was wind that blew it down. But he says, this is beautiful limestone. There's no limestone around here. Where did this come from? So after finding the burned down Mormon temple, he's able to backtrack and find people, and he's able to find a vein that the Mormons used to build their temples. So this is built with the same stone as the Mormon temples out there. So just a funny Has nothing to do with anything we're talking about, but I thought it was
I
fun.
thought you were gonna say you utilize that.
All right, since we've got so many history buffs in here, and it's okay if you don't know, but does anybody know what Galena, Illinois is famous for, a certain person being there from? Grant, I hear Grant. Ah, very good. Ulysses S. Grant was from Galena, Illinois. And do you guys know what today is?
Grant's birthday.
Today is Ulysses S. Grant's 200th birthday. Happy birthday, President Grant. Exactly today. So here we have a picture of Grant. You know, look, basically, you know, the photographers told him, try and look cool, okay? So you know, he's doing that. He's got his lieutenant general stripes on, so this is a little later in the war. But at the time when Ely met him, he didn't look this cool or confident. In fact, he was kind of A loser. He's kind of a loser. He, I heard drunk. We can debate that later. But he didn't know what to do with his life, and his parents didn't know what to do with him. He bounced around. His family were businessmen. They owned leather shops and markets. And he basically got shipped to West Point, just shipping your son to the military because you don't know what to do with him. I guess it's been going on for a while. But he's graduated from West Point, still doesn't know what to do. There's no war going on currently, so the government has no use for him. So he's back at his father's leather shop, sitting behind the counter selling saddles. Yep. So in 1860, Ely's been in Galena for several years, and Grant moves back there because Dad can give him a job. He's failed at farming and trading and all this. And Ely walks into the leather shop and sees this shy guy. Said that Grant used to hide from customers. He'd get his underclerk to serve people because he was so shy. And Ely comes in, and by this point, Ely is jacked. He's 200 pounds of pure muscle, big guy, very, I could see, not to racially profile, but that could be intimidating to a guy from a little white guy. Grant was like 5'8", from a small town. But Ely just instantly takes a liking to him and thinks he's hilarious. A friendship, pretty close friendship starts to grow. And also you gotta think, it's kind of small town, like you strike a friendship with somebody and it's that much stronger because there's not a lot of other people to hang out with, especially if you're a shy person. But there's a great story of Grant basically getting jumped by some criminals in town. And Ely running over next to him, and they both go back to back and are able to fight off the robbers.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is 1860. So commonly, people talk about politics, talk about issues.
Hey, have you heard about some ruckus going on down south?
Yeah, some issue with slavery, this and that. So the common thing started going, people would ask each other, if war breaks out, what are you going to do? And so Grant and Ely are asking each other these questions. And so Ely asks Grant, what will you do if the war breaks out? And Grant's like, well,
the government paid for my education at West Point, so I will have a responsibility to join up if the war breaks out. And Grant had actually, before the war broke out, he had been actually sending letters to governors and to people in Washington to try and get a commission. And every time he did, he'd get turned down. And it's funny because there's some copies of some letters of his where he's asking for a colonelcy and no, and then he tries for a captain's commission and no, and can I be a second lieutenant? No. He was a middle of the pack student. He didn't make any big friends when he was at West Point, so then he tries to get a militia position. The state turns him down. Really kind of amazing.
so war does break out, and Ely tries to enlist. And he wants to get a commission as well, and that would be common. People that have a college education, he's got experience as an engineer, should be a lawyer. Usually those were good enough to be at least commissioned a second lieutenant. If not that, at least be given a company as a captain. And so many people from the Tonawanda and other communities tried to enlist at the onset of the war. But there was an issue. The same excuse was given when he tried to apply for law school. You are not citizens, therefore you cannot serve in our military.
Despite they had in the War of 1812, but they overlooked that.
And the Revolutionary War, and the Battle of River City, and And those were some of the excuses. They said, our fathers fought in the War of 1812. Why can't we fight?
I don't think we mentioned it, but Ely's father, I believe, was a 18 war.
According to the book, he was the first person from his community to enlist in the War of 1812 to help the Americans.
At the start of the war, everybody kind of has this wishful thinking that it's going to be quick. You know, if the South tries something, you know, we'll go in and it'll be over quick. So Washington doesn't want any outside influence. Also, we're trying to push them off of their land, so it's not going to look very well for us if we have a whole company of, say, Tuscarora in the war. It'll just give them that much more political sway and, you know, things like that. So keep them out of the war. Many times we have records of many people trying to sign up and being turned down, including you.
Yes. The problem was the war kept going on several years, and thousands and then tens of thousands of men started dying, and you had hundreds of thousands of casualties. And by 1863, it was like, we're out of people, you know, young men. And so finally in 1863, they started letting people in. Ely's brother, Newton, actually is able to join the famed Tuscarora Company. They weren't all Tuscaroras, but it was Tuscaroras and German immigrants and Seneca people. But Ely thought about joining them, but again, they weren't going to offer him any rank that he thought he deserved based on his experience. And so he's just kind of back at home farming, looking for his opportunity, but he just doesn't want to be cannon fodder. He wants to contribute in a way that he thinks his skills can work.
It's hard for us to picture the real divide between a commissioned and a non-commissioned officer. Things have leveled out a little bit, and they're kind of mutually respected now. But at the time, it was your gentleman, elite class, and and then you had your commissioned, or your enlisted folk that were just whoever signed up, and if somebody can read, he can be the sergeant. And so being a sachem for a nation and a college graduate, it must have just been, you know, humiliating to even think about enlisting like that.
But meanwhile, Grant has enlisted. He's started out low, but he's worked his way up and gotten promoted because people see how apt he is actually at siege work, at fighting the enemy. And so he's at the siege of Vicksburg, and Lincoln likes Grant because all his other generals are not attacking when he wants them to attack, but Grant will listen and attack. And so Grant is finally given a promotion to be a general. And one of the first things that Grant does is start writing letters to assemble his staff. And a letter comes out here to the reservation addressed to Ely saying, hey, you want a job? Ely's like, yes. And so what did he offer him?
He offered him a captain's commission.
So Ely heads west out to the Mississippi River, gets there right before the fall of Vicksburg, and joins Grant's staff. And instantly, Ely is a huge asset to Grant because he knows his stuff.
A lot of the other people that Grant had picked were friends or people that, you know, knew the right people. Imagine that. It's not about what you know, but who you know. And so it's funny because Grant has this whole group of, you know, 10 educated, elite class people, and when it comes right down to it, he really doesn't have anybody that can, you know, spell and do math and, you know, things like that. And then you have an engineer who actually got to where he is due to his you know, quality and intelligence. So he immediately is a lifesaver. He promptly becomes basically Grant's number 2. He becomes a secretary, basically. He's following, doing all the stuff that nobody can else do, writing orders. You know, we need 100 barrels of hog heads here by tomorrow. General Grant sending it out,
gathering intelligence, helping him with the siege work using his engineering skills. So there's a story where he actually saves Grant's life. This was after the Battle of Wilderness. Grant had gotten lost in the woods with his group of assistants, and they were actually heading towards Confederate lines. And Ely's like, you guys don't know how to track at all. It's back this way. And years later, when Ely's in government, one of the Confederate officers comes up to him and says, hey, we saw you that one night outside the Wilderness battlefield, and you guys were almost to us, and you turned around and left. We would have had you all captured or killed. Ely also enjoyed a good joke, as did Grant. So would you like to tell this questionable story, Caleb?
You'd think, in a bloody conflict, you got a bunch of grizzled war vets sitting in there, that it would be all serious, wouldn't you? But, whenever you get men together, shenanigans happen. And one thing that the generals would constantly complain about is these Washington, D.C. weenies showing up and wanting to see the progress to give back to the president or Congress and things like that. And they would come all the time. You'd be in there trying to plan battle. Excuse me, but President Lincoln sent me here. He wants to know what your progress is. And this would drive the generals insane because, first of all, they're trying their best. Second of all, I don't want to tell you and have you publish what we're going to do in the paper because it defeats the whole purpose. Kind of reminds me of like Ukraine, like how we keep saying, this is what we're sending to Ukraine, we're sending this is like, why are we telling the Russians what we're sending them? Anyway, so this happens all the time. Every week there's these people from DC showing up. And there's a new guy coming. And they know he's a new guy, he hasn't been there before. So he comes into camp, they see him walking down the road. Grant, just like in his leather shop, ducks into the next room to not talk to him. They throw Ely his uniform. He puts it on, sits down in his chair. He's waiting in the tent. The guy opens up the curtain, walks in. I'm here to talk to General Grant. He's just standing there looking at him. The guy walks over. That's General Grant. The guy goes, oh, he's so sunburned from being outside. So he says, oh, I'm sorry, General, I'm here for this, and this. He talks to him, walks away. As soon as he gets out of hearing distance, they all just break out laughing. Grant comes back, puts his uniform back on. So.
I just picture that little guy's clothes trying to fit on here.
Yeah. But if you look at a lot of pictures of Grant, he's really wearing some pretty baggy clothes. Grant was known as an incredibly sloppy dresser.
Yeah, he was.
That other photo was just...
And he does look a little like Grant.
He's a male.
Anyway, then the war continues. Eventually, Grant is promoted to be the general over all the armed forces in the United States, and he decides to promote Ely at the same time because Grant is a little foresighted. But we'll talk about that later. Here's a photograph of Grant with his officer corps. These would be the people they're doing all the logistics for him. And here's Ely over in the corner. We actually cropped it. There are more people. They didn't stick him off to the side in the back. He's not on the very end, but he is a part of the integral part. But then we come to the end of the war. Lee's forces start to get surrounded. The war is coming to a close. Grant is closing in. Eventually, Lee realizes the war is lost. There's nothing I can do. He looks to find terms with Grant's army and see, can we stop this? What are the terms? Are people going to be executed? Can we keep our guns? Can we go home? They're working out this through people back and forth. Eventually, they agree to the terms of surrender, and they meet at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. So, Grant's staff's there. They're getting ready to draw it up. Grant asks one of his adjuncts to write up the terms of surrender, and the guy's standing there, and he starts getting the shakes, and
Crumples it up, starts over.
he's trying to write.
Crumples it up, starts over. He does it 4 times. Meanwhile, Lee is there, an intimidating guy. It's becoming a big embarrassment for everybody in the room.
So the guy says, I can't do this, Ely, you do it. And so Ely sits down and writes out the surrender document to end the war. They had a special triplicate pad that they could write 3 copies out, and then he made another copy after that. And so Lee signed them all. One was to go to Washington, one was for Grant, one was for Lee, and then Ely rolled up that 4th copy and stuck that in his coat pocket.
All right.
So again, here you see a photograph. We've got Ely standing right there. I guess they do kind of look like Grant, Caleb. But here is Lee signing the documents as everyone just looks on. It's a very solemn occasion. People tried to cheer. Grant said no cheering. And there's a story that may or not be true between Ely and General Lee.
But as the old saying goes, never get the truth, get in the way of a good story. So we'll tell it to you, and you can decide if it's true or not. It is a great story, but purportedly, Ely went up to introduce himself to General Lee, and Lee was immediately standoffish. And we can kind of see, people speculate that perhaps he thought that he was being introduced to an African American at first, and he thought this was a way they were trying to insult him, basically. Like, you've lost the war, now you'll have to shake hands with an African American officer. And so he stands back. Then all of a sudden, they say that, his eyes opened up, and a small smile came on his face, and Lee took his hand and shook it and said, "It's good to see at least one real American here."
To which Ely is purportedly to have said, "Sir, we are all Americans." If that's true, I still want it to be true, but otherwise it's really good propaganda for American unity. I don't know. But whatever the case, Ely is the instrumental person at this seminal moment that puts the country back together again.
There were hundreds of historic paintings done depicting this moment. It was the big moment of the decade. And if you look at most of them, you don't see Ely in the picture. He's been written out of the paintings. This is our favorite one. We feel like it really captures the moment. You can see him here with his saber, and he's there where he belongs, looking on the document that he just wrote.
So, war is over. Yay! Country's going through reconstruction. Ely's been a bachelor this whole time. He's 36 years old, and he finds a young woman that he fancies, a very young woman.
Good story always has a scandal, doesn't it?
It's not scandalous, it's love, Caleb. She was 18.
She was 18, and she was known as the heartthrob of Virginia.
Oh, did we mention she's white?
She was in all the crowds of Virginia, all the muckety mucks, all the social circles. Her family was one of the most respected, wealthy, and also she was considered to be great beauty. When all of a sudden, rumor has it around town that she's going to marry General Parker. That's one thing we forgot to mention. At the end of the war, General Grant has him promoted to general before the war is over, so that he has that for the rest of his life as a title.
So, the wedding is set. Some people are really curious about this. This guy from this Indian reservation is going to marry this woman. It's set up in the cathedral in D.C. Wedding day comes, bride comes down. Ely does not make an appearance. And we do not know precisely what happened. There are 3 theories. One, he was kidnapped by either people from his hometown, or he went out and had a little too much fun at the bachelor party and was so hungover he couldn't get up the next morning, or he got the jitters and
Shivery.
But whatever the case,
Of the 3, I probably lean towards the second one.
Yeah, me too.
we don't know. Whatever it was, a few days later he reappeared. I mean, this was in all the papers. People thought he would run away with some woman, or he
There was
in
even
Canada.
some reports that some people said, we heard he was back on the reservation. Oh, I heard he's back in Illinois.
Someone said they found his body in the Potomac. Yeah, just all kinds of stuff. But whatever happened, he went to his future in-laws, begged forgiveness, and the wedding was back on a few weeks later. More people wanted to show up to this wedding. They show up to the church. They say, when does the ceremony start? They say, oh, they got married last night. They did a quiet ceremony to avoid the public speculation.
And they intentionally put it out in the papers that they were getting married the next day. So all the people with the glasses and the rocks and everything, they showed up, there's no party.
General Grant was there and gave the bride away. Shows you how tight of a friendship they had. Andrew Johnson, nobody liked him. General Grant runs for president 4 years later. And we see that Grant wants to put people that he can trust, and he thought, you know what? We've always had a commissioner of Indian Affairs. Maybe someone that's actually from one of those communities should be running this department.
Makes sense.
At the time, it was like, what? But Grant was like, no. Again, some people tried to stop it because they're like, this guy isn't even a citizen. How can he be in a cabinet level position? But they were able to get a legal loophole, and Congress approved it, and he was appointed to Commissioner of Indian Affairs by President Grant.
At the time, the position was lucrative. It was so easy. You were being given these treaty monies and goods, and you could funnel off amounts, you could do favors back and forth.
Yeah, I'm supposed to give this to you, but instead I'm just going to sell it to this guy for $1 because it costs me nothing.
Or let everybody drink a little before it gets to you, pass it down the corruption line. Ely had a quote, and that's, if you want to be rich,
Be an Indian land agent.
yeah, be an Indian land agent, because just so few ever actually got to the communities. That seems familiar to government stuff today, too. It's just, you approve $1 billion or something, then you find out, oh, we got a $20,000 grant. That's great.
And this is where a lot of stuff from his own community started to get some pushback. Ely started to push for a lot of assimilation and English education. He found that that's how he got ahead in life. And so that's what people on not just his home community, but all these native nations across the continent, it would be good for them to learn English, learn trades, become Americanized, and things will go well for them. And that leads us down the path where we have gotten to with the scandals of residential schools and the extinction of languages. Again, whole other subject. But Ely was pushing this. And a lot of other people at the time were pushing it too, because they thought that's how people can succeed. But at the heart, it was working towards erasing people's cultural identity. But then he's dealing with all kinds of issues because these corrupt land agents don't like him, and certain politicians don't like him. Ely doesn't like them. And then he's having to tell these native nations that these are the terms, and they're like, yeah, you're supposed to be looking out for us, man. So it's a lot. No, basically nobody likes him.
Yeah, it's a political position where he literally finds himself, the people who he's taken their jobs away that were siphoning off it in Washington are angry at him and trying to destroy him every chance they get. And meanwhile, especially the natives in the West and eventually his own community, they start to view him almost like a turncoat. Not everybody necessarily, but it's at least starting to be rumored. And you're getting more and more every year. Things aren't getting better. Who are you going to point at? The Indian agent. So he's really starting to feel the stress of this position. And
people start bringing up all kinds of issues against him, accusing him of you accuse him the same thing you're doing. Accuse him of corruption, siphoning funds. They did investigations. They found no wrongdoing. People wanted Grant to fire him. Grant refused. Grant said, no way. He's good at his job. No. But after 3 years, Ely just could not take it anymore, and he goes to Grant and offers his resignation because he just says, I can't do it. And Grant reluctantly accepts it. So, what do you do after a stint in Washington, Caleb? What do most Congress people do, or politicians, or people?
Buy a mansion on 1,000 acres of land and never talk to anybody again? That's what I do. Probably in the Adirondacks.
So, after this, he ends up moving to Connecticut, and he starts investments in stocks. He takes trips into New York City, and he's good at this. It's easy to make money in New York. He became a millionaire in a short time. It's very easy to become rich, but it's also very easy to lose it all.
Especially in stocks.
So in the late 1870s, there was a market crash, nothing like the Great Crash of '29, but pretty much the second biggest market crash in U.S. history happened at this time. He lost his fortune, and he was just like, oh well.
I'm trying to remember his quote. He basically said, no
Tears
use-
make a sore throat.
Yeah. Crying over things lost it makes a sore throat. He basically said, no sense crying over spilled milk, is what he says. He grew up with nothing. So for him, he was able to be perfectly content being poor again.
He ends up really getting into public speaking. He's one of the most famous men in the country at this point. And so he joins dozens of historical societies, museums, Grand Army of the Republic, and he enjoys going around speaking. He's got his medal that Red Jacket had that was given to George Washington. He would travel to Chicago and all kinds of different places around the country, sharing his history and sharing his life story. But as for a career after that, he got a simple little position working in the New York City Police Department as a clerk. He would order office supplies, basically.
Now, there's something that maybe you didn't, it hasn't triggered in your mind yet, but he's living in Connecticut, trading in New York City. What's the job that his real job for the Seneca?
Postmaster?
He's a sachem. He's their representative. He's been elected by the clan mothers to be a representative.
But ever since the war, he's really not been active in the community. He's gone back every year to visit, spend a few weeks there, but he's not actively taking part in government affairs.
So this is where, sadly, in his legend, this is something that it puts a sour taste in a lot of people's mouth today because, he was given this position, he was pushed to get this education so that he could be helpful to his community, and he's in Connecticut.
But it's a pretty cool life. This is a picture of him with his daughter, Maud.
I was going to ask if he had any kids.
He did have one daughter. She was born 10 years after their marriage. There were people in Washington, D.C. that, we have a quote from one of them that said, the only blessing of that marriage between those two is at least they haven't produced any half-breeds. So Minnie was born 10 years later, so obviously I think she's 17 or 18 in this portrait. This is very beautiful. She was always proud of her heritage. Even though she did not grow up on the reservation, people would often make fun of her for her mixed identity, and she would just come back at them and say, well, I'm the only real American, so deal with it. So, he passed away, I think the age of 67. He had diabetes, several underlying health issues. Eventually he passed away, but we can see his legacy. He's a diplomat, translator, engineer, sachem, general, commissioner of Indian Affairs, and from what we have from his wife's writings, they deeply loved each other. Like that incident with the wedding didn't put it off. They had a very happy marriage. They adored each other. From what we can tell, there was never instances where they were dealing with, lost love or broken infidelity or anything like that. They were generally together. So, that we hope we've done him a bit of service. Obviously, it's so hard to cover a man with such a life and a life that impacted our country and the communities around us so much.
On our podcast, we have a 3-part series. So, this was connecting 3 episodes, and then we have another 3 or 4 on other involvement in the Civil War.
From other members of the Six Nations.
Particularly his family.
So yeah, we have over 80 episodes covering their history all the way from prehistory up through the Civil War so far.
Wow.
Yes, sir.
Was his lineage completely Seneca?
No.
I don't know the answer. Someone else in this room.
Ely's brother, Levi, was my grandfather.
Wow.
And his parents, Ely's mother was white. And I'm not sure if she was Irish or,
Yep. That's coming back now that you mention it, I do remember that.
yeah, so,
Like most people, there were, I mean, the white colonists had been, he was born in 1828. Dutch settlers came in the early 1600s. There was a lot of time for intermarriage and things, so it was not uncommon. But they didn't really look at it, whatever you were born into from your mother, that's what clan you are. And so there are a lot of people that had a white father, some trader comes in, marries a woman or maybe just has a consensual relation with them.
same with Corn Planter and,
Yeah, Handsome Lake.
Their father was Dutch.
Yes.
He was white.
Yeah, but they were still fully considered members of their community because it's what your mother was born into. If your mother was white, you had to be adopted back into the tribe, which happened with Arthur Parker, the anthropologist and historian and writer. He had to be adopted into his own nation because it was on the other side.
No, I don't think that's right.
No?
It's reversed, it's
No,
reversed in
it's
Canada.
only by the mother.
Well, that's what I said.
Yeah, but you said he got adopted back in because.
Because his father was Seneca, but his mother was white.
Right, so he would still be what his mother was.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's not what she's saying. What she's saying is he would still be his mother, which would be white.
Even if they adopted him, he's still white.
He's
Okay.
still considered white. Right?
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And
Thank you.
he's not a member of the.
He can hang out with us.
Thank you for clarifying. This is why it's good to have people. All right.
Did he ever practice law?
No, he never practiced law. He never got a law
Never
degree.
got a degree?
Never got a degree.
Relations?
Nope.
Okay.
Survey is that everybody's a fan.
That citizenship was not given to members of the Native Nations until 1924.
Yeah.
So-
He finally became Americans.
And that was after they got him drunk, because they didn't even know they were citizens.
Yeah, a lot of people actually didn't want to be citizens. It was a very dividing thing in the communities because they wanted to keep their national identity, and so there was a
Where was he
division.
buried?
He was buried in Connecticut initially, but then his community said, that's Algonquian land, from those tribes out there, he should be buried with his own people. And so they exhumed him and reinterred him at the cemetery in Buffalo, Woodlawn, I believe. And he's buried next to Red Jacket. Forest Lawn, thank you. Yes.
We can help you.
Because he sold the land. I mean, the big monument
Right.
right there. They honor him because he sold land.
Yeah. Ely's monument's not so big. Anyone else?
When he went out to out west, he found, and they sent him out, he found out that all the supplies were going to the Native Americans out west. And it was because the settlers got some of that food that was sent
Oh, yeah.
from here.
That's what happened over and over again. We didn't have time to talk about it, but the Dakota Sioux War, during the Civil War,
Yes.
that's what was happening. The people were supposed to be given their payments and food, and they were starving in their own communities. They ended up raiding white settlements, and it started a war, and
Yeah.
a whole thing happened because of that. Yes,
What were
sir.
some of your resources that you guys drew from to get some of
Uh,
the history?
So definitely Lawrence Hutman's book, Warrior in Two Camps.
Yeah,
Basically
there were two books.
yeah, there's two.
One was Warrior in Two Worlds, and one was Warrior in Two Camps.
Yeah, so it's easy to get them confused.
Oh.
Also, PBS did a very in-depth special on him, which we watched. And then, obviously, you got to read about Civil War history, and there's no way you can contain that to one book. So lots of books on Civil War
But I
history.
saw Warrior 2 Camp is even for sale on the
Yep.
shelf, so grab it if it's something
Yeah.
you're
We're
interested
reading
in.
that book now in our history.
That's
We
what
have
they
a
were
book
saying.
club on the reservation.
You don't have to go through it anymore.
There's one more interesting thing I just remembered, and that's right after the war, General Grant realized, he thought of something, came to his head, and it was, there's a loophole that they might try to make sure that Ely doesn't get a pension. And that's because he signed up as a volunteer. And so volunteer officer and a full commissioned officer got different pensions. Once the war was over, you were done. So we have records right at the end of the war where his current commission is canceled and he is made second lieutenant. Cross it out, file it, promotion to captain, promotion to colonel, promotion to general. And that way for the rest of his life, and it actually ended up being a real blessing to his widow because they lost a lot of their money, but his widow was able to get the general's pension after Ely died. So Grant might have had some problems, but he did look out for people that he cared about. Yes, sir.
You said that he was all in favor of educating the Indians in...
When I say educated, I mean educating in an American school.
When they took the children off the reservation and put them in Indian schools and tried to...
That's what happened. That came from that. That's the legacy. Yes. I mean, he had gone to a boarding school, but it wasn't like a full residential school like what they were trying to do.
It was in
Yates, yeah.
up by,
Yeah.
on 104.
Yeah. But these residential schools quickly descended into, we need to do an episode on residential schools, but I'm dreading it. But basically, they would beat the kids if they spoke their native language. They would cut their hair, change their name, force them.
The money was taken off.
Yeah, and they were just treated.
Was that after he resigned his commission?
It wasn't like it just started one day. It was a ramp up, and it continued all. I mean, there are many people alive today that still experience that, like living people. It did not go away, in the 20th century. It continued into the 50s and 60s, and even longer in Canada.
And the families go down into their children as well.
Yeah, it destroyed so many lives. But
The teachers used to hit them with a metal thing on top of their head.
Yeah.
Yes. Thomas Indian School.
it's absolutely evil. That was obviously not his intention. But what do they say about best intentions? It's just we don't foresee the consequences.
What happened?
Yeah.
He said that when he went there to kill her, she went to the school and asked for her. And she said she left the school
Who was that?
from our reservation to Salem, Thomas Indian School.
When you
It's-
get to that, let us know, we can help you.
I would like to interview some people personally. It'd be much better than researching it. I mean, research it, but
Always better have them real.
I would rather have people share their stories of either themselves or their family members. So yes, we would love. See us afterwards. Get contact with me. I'd love to interview you and have people share their stories.
This has been wonderful.
Yeah.
Any more questions? We really appreciate you guys inviting us out, and we hope you learned something. And just thank you so much. This was
Well, thank you, gentlemen, again for coming out. That was amazing. So be sure to go check out the podcast and listen to every single episode. I want to thank you all for coming out again. This was an amazing turnout. Just a couple quick announcements. Just a couple quick announcements. Our next guest speaker is 2 weeks from today, so Wednesday, May 11th. Joyce Thompson-Hovey will be coming out, and she'll be doing a presentation on Belleville Lockwood, local woman who actually ran for president back in the 1880s. First one on a formal political party. So that'll be at 7 o'clock, same time, same place. So if you're interested, you can come out and check that out. And the day after, we have our next trivia night, which we have every month, and it'll be on Lewis and Clark. So that's true. Thank you. I can't forget about that. So tomorrow morning we have our Java with Joe E. Morning coffee group, and I will be giving a presentation. So on Joseph Burke, who is a man who lived some of his life here in Genesee County, but he was actually a backup musician for Jenny Lind, the Swedish Nightingale. So I will be talking about that tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Coffee and donuts, so come in bright and early and you can listen to me speak for a little while. So.
And if you want to listen to the show, if you have one of these modern gadgets, either an iPhone or an Android, you can find us on iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio app, Spotify, any podcasting app will show up. And you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, or we have a website as well.
People still join the sweet potato clan?
Oh, we won't talk about that right now.
Wow,
All right.
that's another story.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.